Hello again, everyone. Welcome to week 3, advanced training principles and exercise prescription. Look, today we're going to have a look at adaptations that occur through aerobic and anaerobic training. These are the things that we're hoping to generate to improve athletic performance. Okay, again, I believe your assessment task 1 is due this weekend on Sunday. The lit review. If you are having problems, feel free to email me or give me a call to confirm. If you want me to have a quick look over your drafts, again, that is fine. Send them through to me and I'll have a look. I generally do try to get a turnaround relatively quickly. So we'll just share screens and we'll go into our first lecture of the day. Just make sure, yep, that's up and running. So as you can see, we're talking about aerobic and anaerobic physiological adaptations. These are the changes that are occurring internal, sort of depending on the cellular level. Now, when we talk about aerobic and anaerobic physiological adaptations in the training, what we're looking to are endurance training, speed, agility, quickness, and plyometric. These will all come into, particularly when we're talking about movement across the ground and efficiency of movement. Now, when we look at endurance training and anything that's developing your aerobic capacity is going to be considered endurance training. We're looking to develop your maximum VO or your VO2 max, and that's the max amount of oxygen you can use per kilo. We're also looking to enhance your lactate threshold. Now, your lactate threshold is the point where you can maintain your highest velocity or your highest amount of energy use without going into lactic acid accumulation or switching to your anaerobic. So it's the highest or the hardest you can work whilst you're still engaging the aerobic energy system. And also it develops your exercise. In other words, your energy cost to do a given movement actually decreases as the adaptation occurs. So if you're running 4-minute Ks, and your fitness develops and you maintain that 4-minute Ks as you're using less energy to do it as your adaptation occurs. And these all enhance performance. So we've got a variety of different training methods. Probably the old favorite is long, slow duration. This is predominantly an off-season training if you're looking at field sports, or if you're looking at middle distance runners, it will be, what they call a lower intensity day as opposed to with higher volume. You're running around 70% of your VO2 max or 80% of your max heart rate. And it's usually greater than race distance. Now, if you're looking at it this way, most field sports may cover anywhere from, the rugbies may cover 6 kilometres to AFL and soccer may cover up to 15 kilometres. In the off season, you're going to be looking at them running a lot of distance, getting up miles, but we're not going to be running marathon distance. If you look at Steve Monaghetti, who was one of our top marathon runners back in the 90s, I think maybe around Sydney Olympic time, I'm not sure quite chronologically where he falls, but he used to run 200 kilometres a week in his training. We're not going to be dealing with that much for field sports. Another one that we can do is our pace and tempo training, lactate threshold. And that is where you will run a kilometre or run at a certain pace. So you may go, okay, we're training to run 10 kilometres, 3 kilometres, but we're going to run it at a higher tempo than what we would for the 10 kilometres distance. So it's at a higher pace, and it's about taking you up to that lactate threshold area to keep you up at that. So, you're looking around 80 to 85%, not quite 85% of your max heart rate. And then there's our interval training. Intensity is close to VO2 max, 3 and 5 minutes or as low as 30 seconds. Now, remember, with aerobic conditioning, we are talking about longer intervals as opposed to high intensity interval training. Understand there's a difference. High intensity interval training, you probably only go on not more than 30 seconds. Whereas with aerobic or endurance conditioning, we're talking 3 and 5 minutes. And it's a work to rest ratio 1-to-1. So if you do a 3-minute working interval, you do a 3-minute recovery interval. But that's not going to be a passive recovery. That is, you'll run at, say, at a 4-minute K, and then you'll have 3 minutes where you'll run perhaps the 6-minute K, and then you go back to a 3-minute K, 6-minute K, or something to that volume. Then we can get into our high intensity interval training, repeated high intensity. So this is where you're doing your short sprints. Short, less than 45 seconds, long 2 to 4 minutes. And again, you're working at high intensity, and generally your work to rest ratio is going to be a lot greater, whereas with the aerobic or that normal interval training where it's 1-to-1, you're looking at maybe 1-to-3, 1-to-4, or even 1-to-5, depending on the intensity. The higher the intensity, the lower the time you're going to work, but the greater recovery you'll need relative to your working interval. So if you work for 20 seconds, you're probably needing 80 seconds, anywhere from 60 to 100 seconds recovery between the next interval. And then there's your fartlek training, combination of several of the previous mentioned types of training, easy running, fast running. Probably the easiest way to look at that is if you've been in team sport. I know they used to love it in soccer when you're running around as a group and the guys at the end have to sprint to the front, and the next guy sprint to the front, the next guy sprint to the front, and then they drop back and jog. That's one of the traditional types of fartlek training. Or you can also have that you do one lap of the oval or one lap of a track at a certain pace, and then you do the next lap at a faster pace. And again, you'll base it on your VO2 max or your heart rate, depending on your athletes. But all of these are looking to establish your aerobic capacity. In off-season, you're probably going to look to the long, slow duration, the longer intervals rather than the high intensity, primarily because if you start with high intensity in the off-season, you've got nowhere to go for the book guys in pre-season, pre-comp, and in the comp. So you want to build up to it. High intensity is more prone to injuries if your muscles haven't adapted appropriately. Then we move into our other one, speed and agility. Now, speed is movement velocity in a straight line, whereas then we move into change of direction, and agility about changing directions without losing speed. Anyone can change directions, but to maintain the speed. And if you have a look at some of the footballers, we'll use NRL probably. If you look at your Ben Barbers, your Billy Slaters, and that, they're able to change. Jared Hayne, now that he's back, they're able to change direction but not lose speed. It's a skill that makes people stand out. Other people can change direction, but they lose a lot of their speed when they change direction. The bigger you are, the stronger you are, the heavier you are, the harder it is to change direction and not lose speed. Hence why small guys have that agility. Needed to change direction, velocity, and mode in response to a stimulus. So here we have change of direction, need to explosively change movement direction, and agility. Another way to look at that is both change of direction and agility can be referred to as agility, the ability. But one is reactive and the other is planned agility. So change of direction becomes more under planned. So you already, your athlete looks at the direction and knows which way they're going, and they already make that plan for it. They go, I'll take out and then I'll cut inside the fullback. I'll draw him out and then cut inside. Whereas reactive agility is more reacting. You're chasing the ball and it bounces, or you're chasing an opponent and they change direction. So that's another way to look at it. And you need to train both of them. Okay, doing planned agility will help your body and muscle memory and trigger those in a reactive agility place. So speed, linear, multi-direction. Now it's all about mass times acceleration. Mass is the weight of the athlete and how fast they move, rate of force development. And it's an index of explosive strength. So we talk about power to weight ratio. And impulse is the generated force and the time required. So we're talking about the impulse momentum. Now they're the biomechanical terms that we refer to it. So force is mass and acceleration. So the greater the acceleration needed over a greater mass to generate the same force. Now the base for speed primarily is neuromuscular function. So it's that explosive training. So when we're talking about power training, it's not about creating the muscular, it's about creating the synchronization and the firing patterns of our motor units that controls the contraction of our muscle fibers or muscle mass. Rate of and strength of muscle contraction, so neural drive, excitability, and the increases in rate of force development all come from a neuromuscular drive. But we do strength training because when one of the first adaptations that occur when we do strength, as in absolute strength, that's what we talk 1 RM, 3 RAM, is the neural, and that is recruiting a greater volume of your motor units or of your muscle from that particular muscle. So that's what we need to incorporate strength training when we're trying to develop power as well and speed. Now we can go on to stretch shortening cycle. So remember that stretch reflex, your Golgi tendon and your muscle spindle, and how they generate that impulse, that stored elastic energy. While we do things like plyometrics, your drop jumps, and it's about that safety mechanism of stretching and then contracting it with that neural activation to then adapt that into the drive of the muscle contraction to aid in force development. And that's the basis of the theory behind plyometrics and its effectiveness. Now, agility is a culmination of all the physical attributes that possess. You've got to be able to react to stimulus, quick and efficient starting, be able to change direction. They also need to be able to deaccelerate, brake, or stop very quickly. Fast, smooth, efficient, and more importantly, repeatable. You've got the body moving in a horizontal direction, the body moving in a vertical direction. You've got different body segments at all. And we need to change that. So as you can see, we've got from endurance, we've got speed, and we've got agility. Coordination, working together various muscles for the production of various movements. And this is why we need to train agility. So we're triggering the brain so we can recognize what muscles, if we go in one direction and we need to change, it needs to be trained which muscles need to be recruited in what order. No different than when you first started in the gym and you're doing a bench press and that bar's all over it. Your body adapts very quickly as to what muscles need to require to fire, but you have to do the training to develop that. It's the same with agility. And we do it through 4 steps. We got stimulate the sensory receptors. So again, the body goes, bang, okay, we're moving, we need to contract that muscle. Now the sensory receptors send that information to our CNS, our brain. Sends us in back, whoops, we move, we need that muscle contracted. Then the CNS executes the signal to contract the muscles, to stop movement, to change direction. And then it's sending that information back to the appropriate muscles. And we need to train that, no different than anything else. That coordination, the more often we train, the more efficient the body gets at it. If we don't do any training, then our reaction and our change in direction is going to be a lot slower in the efficiency and probably more likely risk of an injury. So we talk about motor learning. It's a systematic change of movement behavior. So we've got to attain that first. First of all, we've got to learn what the movement is and what happens. And in that, it leads to the perfection of the movement. Identification, in other words, we receive information through our 5 senses. But we're talking about our sensory motors. Yes, we feel, and generally we're going to think of that proprioceptive ability, the muscles feeling the movement and feeling it in the position that needs to contract. And then the selection of the information gets sent to the central nervous system, and the body needs to be able to, how do we apply that? Programming again. Now, when it's a new habit, the brain doesn't really know which muscles, so it's going to start contracting any muscles it can. But we can program that and create the program plan that when we're doing this, we need to change that direction. We need to recruit these muscles rapidly at this time. Best motor program that fits the situation was training. And it develops from feedback. Oops, that was a bit slow. Oops, no, I couldn't turn up. I kept running. What did I have to do there? And it's an elimination process. That didn't work. This does work. And again, it comes down to training. So you can do simple drills to go through the movement like anything else. Getting our arms swinging, you practice doing the arm swinging to help to drive the force of the contraction by driving down. And we train that, so when we run, it becomes automated. Same with our agility and changing directions. The recruitment, first of all, it's crude. You're learning a new task, you consciously comprehend all movement. And anyone who's tried to learn a new dance step or any dancing whatsoever, you know that, and you're taking these big steps and you're a bit slow and you make the odd mistakes. As you gradually get the feel for the movement, you will start understanding and you're able to, the body will start reacting to it through proprioception and its depth receptors and the receptors, whether they be dynamic or static. And then come to the super fine coordination. That's the final stage. You've developed the movement patterns and it's become an automated response. So like if someone throws something at you and for some reason you can get your hands up and catch it because you're used to catching. And it's no different with our coordination and our agility movements. One of the other things big came from the Russia is our plyometrics. From the 70s, jump training, plyometric measurable increases. And it's about reaching a maximum strength in a short time. Speed, strength, ability is known as power. So think of plyometrics and power as applying a lot of strength in a very short period of time. Now we make use of our stretch shortening cycle, which we discussed earlier, the stretch reflex and our muscle spindle. Remember, the body has this safety mechanism, the muscle spindle. So when it feels the muscle lengthening rapidly and it hasn't been there before, its concern is that muscle will separate, tear, damage. And so it automatics a contraction to stop the stretching. And we're trying to use that, coordinate that, and able to then use it to create that contraction that generates the force. It's a storage of tension that we're trying to adapt and improvise and using that potential and elastic energy. It is strictly anaerobic. There is no aerobic endurance in it. It's all ATP PC. As you know, if you've ever tried doing a couple of box jumps or a couple of bounds or single leg hops, you're not going to do a lot before you're sucking in the big ones. And so you require maximum energy before a single explosive act. So you need to have that recovery, and no different than doing your 1 RM. You can do it, but then you need to develop or regenerate your ATP. Now the question is, how do we put all these together? Like, where do we start and how do we apply it? What time of the season is what is the optimum time to develop and to bring these in? So if we start with our off season, now that can be general preparation, it can be off season. They're the main two that you'll see. It's about base training. As you see, you start off with long duration, low intensity, and it's about establishing that aerobic base. Now, as the off season progresses, your intensity increases. So you might start off at running at 60%, depending on how detrained your footballers are. If you're looking at elite athletes, they're going to come back with a fairly solid amount of aerobic conditioning because they're professional. If you've got your semi-professional or your club athletes, then they're going to come down with probably zero aerobic capacity. So you're going to have to drop it and judge it. So it becomes a bit of a balancing act. So you're looking at long duration, low intensity workouts. But as each week goes by, you're going to increase that intensity. And you're looking at jumping it from 5 to 10%. So you may start, if you've got a 6-week to 8-week period, you might start at 5% and go from 60% to 65 to 70 to 75 to 80 to 85. And continued overload. If you don't overload, you're not going to get the continued improvements. And it's simple as that. If you run the same at the same pace every time, you are going to find over the same course that eventually your performances will start to struggle, that you will actually run it slow. You need to vary it. You can run them at the same distance, but perhaps vary it, perhaps throw in a couple of hills, make them run it a little bit quicker. Have them slow sections and sprint sections. You need overload. So you need to increase either the distance, or if you're happy with the distance, the intensities that they run it at. And that's for your off season. Now you go into your program pre-season, and that's looking at that 4 to 6 week period prior to the competition. The intensity starts increasing, and with that, the volume or the level of work you do will start to reduce. And you start incorporating all types, so it's not just long, slow, different. It's not aerobic or endurance. This is when you start bringing in your high intensity interval, looking at your agility and your speed and your anaerobic. and that sorts of things. You're also going to identify the strengths and weaknesses. So if you've got a person whose acceleration is slow, you may direct them into doing an acceleration, or their agility, or their speed endurance, or their maximal speed. So you're going to sit there and look at it, and this is where you identify it before you get into that pre-comp stage. And then we get into the in-season. And now with the in-season, we're going to look at, that's going to include pre-comp. So you've got pre-comp and competition. And it's going to be dependent on sport. If you're a middle distance racing, well, they're going to be doing long intervals, but at a high intensity. Whereas team sport's going to be high intensity type speed, agility work. When do you put it in? If you're doing speed, agility, well, you're going to do that when they're fresh, not when they're at the end of it. So they're going to do their warm-up. Then you're going to go into your speed, agility, and then you might go off and do skill work. And then you might actually do a conditioning, as opposed to skill work after a strong conditioning session. But the real thing is, say if you're doing small-sided fitness games with a football team, you're not going to go through and do a warm-up and then go into a small-sided fitness games, then do skill work under fatigue, and then do your speed and agility. You're going to do your speed and agility before the bulk of it. Because they need to be fresh when they do this. Also, the volume, the intensity is going to be a lot higher. The volume is going to be a lot lower once it's in season, because we talk about it at that period of time. It's about maintenance. So with that, you're going to look at what sort of agility do they need for the sport, what sort of acceleration, what sort of distances do they sprint. And you're going to vary it and fluctuate it throughout the season. And we'll discuss more of that when we get into the annual plans. So, but that's what you need to look at in what time of the season. So again, if we go back off season, that's when you look at really developing your aerobic base, long, slow distance, but you've got to continually increase intensity and or volume. So you start building it up. A 5% increase is usually a nice way. That'll keep the physios happy. In strength and conditioning, 5 to 10% is quite all right, but the physio is like 2.5 to 5%. And it's constantly a battle between the medical staff and the strength and conditioning staff. So the best way is to keep on side with everyone. You go 5%, it's not an excessive amount of overload. Once we get closer in and we get into pre-season, the specific phase, we're going to increase the intensity, get closer to game. Maintaining or reducing duration. Then we're going to, if the intensity increases, the length of time that we have doing this particular conditioning phase is going to decrease. We're going to type all types of training. So there's going to be some endurance intervals. There's going to be some higher sprinting. We also look to identify the weaknesses and work directly on those weaknesses. Now, once we come into in-season, it's pretty much just looking at speed and agility and focusing in team sport. Of course, long distance is going to be different, but we'll focus more on team sport. So look at it that way, that in team sport, it's going to have to be acceleration and deceleration. Because remember, irrespective, a lot of times you've got to run fast, then you've got to be able to decelerate and reverse. So, and it doesn't matter whether it's football, whether it's rugby league, rugby union, AFL, even basketball and netball, those sorts of things. It's a lot of moving, stop, start. So that's a sort of agility and acceleration work that we need to work on. And we'll incorporate plyometrics. That's pretty much what you have to look at and consider as far as advanced trainings. And again, this gives you an insight. If you get into some of the preferred readings that we've given, it will help you on how to deal with this topic. Okay, especially when it comes to promoting what is, or running a plan, or if you're a coach and you have your fitness staff understanding that's what they're about and how much time they need. So, and it does become a complicated case, because you also have to allow for recovery. Things that are high intensity are going to require greater recovery. And I'm not just talking about during the actual session, but post-training sessions before you have the next one or the game. All of this takes time. So plyometric will have more recovery required than just, say, some agility type work. So if you're playing in 2 days, you don't want to do a plyometric session on a Thursday if you're playing on a Saturday. Or if you've got a relatively short turnaround, like a Sunday game and a Friday game, or in the NRL, a Monday game and a Friday game, you're probably going to maybe do a very brief speed agility session, but not much in the way of plyometrics at all. So that turnaround period, it becomes a juggling act. So look at it, and it's more about knowing that at what time of the year what we need to be looking at. So off season, it's aerobic conditioning, getting the hamstrings, getting the muscles, building up that base aerobic. Then when we get into pre-season or that specific phase, we look at the type of sport and what's needed, and then we look to identify particular areas that individual athletes actually may require, whether it be agility, acceleration, deceleration, or just maximal speed. And then so we'll start designing for individual athletes. And then in season, it's about maintenance, and that's just looking purely at speed and agility and acceleration, deceleration. And you'll occasionally bring it in for light weeks. Okay, guys. Again, I think your assessment's due this week on Sunday. Make sure you get it in. Please email me if you have any queries or questions. Okay, guys. All the best. I'll see you next week in cyberspace. Keep it up, keep working, and we'll see you shortly. Okay, bye for now.